What is going on, everybody? I'm here talking about The Invisible Man, mainly the first five chapters of the book. The first chapter starts with the narrator with his grandpa in the hospital. They start conversing with each other, and the grandpa talks about conforming with people of authority or with the whites mainly. The narrator didn't really understand what his grandpa was talking about, but he will soon understand what that meant. Afterwards, the narrator goes to a graduation party so he can tell about his speech. But he attends a battle royal first. He gets bruised and beaten up pretty good. And afterwards, after he gets beaten and earns his cash for participating in the battle royal, he talks about with his speech and everything was fine. But people kept interrupting him, plus his bruises and injuries didn't really help him with his speech. People kept asking him to speak up and try to understand him better instead of using these big words those people were referring to during his speech. After his speech, he was given a briefcase where he was invited, or there was a college acceptance letter so he can go to the college. The next few chapters, the narrator talks about the life in the college and what it looked like. And he was tasked to drive Mr. Norton around. And that's where things start being different for the narrator. He wasn't familiar with everything while on the drive. And he drove to different areas of the place, like Youngblood's cabin, where he wasn't very fond of. This is because he has done some, let's say, detestable things in the word of the narrator, but Mr. Norton was a bit intrigued with this information. And so he decided to go and ask Youngblood about himself. The Mr. Norton was very surprised about this, and so he kept asking him and asking him. But Mr. Norton eventually had gotten a bit ill or exhausted because of the heat. So narrator dragged him back into the car and drove elsewhere. Mr. Norton wanted to get some whiskey so he could feel better, right? So he went to Golden Day, which was like the closest stop. During the ride, though, things started to be a little different for the narrator. He saw some chain gangs and he tried to ward them off. At first, they weren't very conforming or submissive to the idea until uh, it was said that a veteran was there. The narrator obviously lied about this, and it seems like the narrator understands how, in this town, how people may react, which was, in my opinion, very smart of him. So he went along by and got to Golden Day. He was able to get there, but well, things started getting a bit tricky because he ordered a whiskey, but well, they couldn't give it to him or to Mr. Norton because they don't allow their drinks to go outside. So the narrator needed to drag Mr. Norton into Golden Day. However, things started to get complicated, but they were easy, well, resolved, fortunately. But once they got inside and Mr. Norton got his whiskey, the people in the bar started to get a bit rowdied up in the back. So they started to fight, and a lot of things go wrong. Mr. Norton and the narrator both get separated, and so they had to like find each other through like the mess of people. But then Mr. Norton got knocked out again or fell ill again. So they tried to get help, and they were able to get a room upstairs so Mr. Norton can recover. Then Mr. Norton gets like an encounter with a veterinarian and they start conversing. The things that the vet has been talking about were contrary to the beliefs of both the narrator and the and Mr. Norton because they all believe that others have more influence than themselves, but that's obviously not the case. And the vet kept trying to enforce this idea onto them, but they both had enough and left. Mitch felt a bit ill, but he was able to get in the car and drive out there. And when they came back to the campus, the narrator was told to go back, or not go back, go to Mr. Bledsoe's office where he was reprimanded for such actions that caused Mr. Norton to get hurt or fell ill. So he was punished for that. But Mr. Norton tried to cover for the narrator. The narrator got a bit worried about the punishment, but once he heard that Mr. Norton might be able to help him reduce some of the punishments, he felt a bit relieved. But he was told to go to like a religious event where Mr. Bledsoe was at. He came there and he was surprised by everything that was happening, from like the people singing, their looks, and the entire place as a whole. Then he heard like the speeches over there and he was caught speechless, and he felt a bit regretful and shameful. All right, guys, that is the end of the first five chapters, and here are like my takes about it. First of all, the story in itself is very contrary to how the narrator thinks about it, and how his beliefs are contrary and contradicts the ideas that everyone around him are like throwing at him. For example, in the Golden Day, when he was talking with the veterinarian and the and with Dr. Norton, they both share contradictory views. The vet thinks that you can have all the power you can, or thinks that you should be free to do whatever you want. And he was saying how the narrator and Mr. Norton are like scared to do that. And that makes like Mr. Norton very conflicted and confused about the whole situation. Also, I believe that the vet doesn't think that sort of this fate that Mr. Norton believes in is real. And he even states that it's a silly thought or something along those lines. Another thing I found is that every in each chapter there seems to be always a belief that is carried against the narrator. For example, the talk with Youngblood and how the narrator perceives it, he isn't really fond of how he speaks to Mr. Norton, like a very casual way of talking, while he believes that Mr. Norton is a very important individual who should have like the most or the utmost respect whilst talking. And the things that Youngblood said about like how the way he's been living, the narrator doesn't really isn't really fond of that either, and says that that's the way of the past and he should be living like the way of today or during the present of that chapter. And yeah, those are the things I found in my takes on these first five chapters today. See you later, guys.